The cruiser sat idling at the edge of the Fairview Shopping Center lot, a pool of shadow in the late afternoon sun. Inside, the man behind the wheel wasn't thinking about justice or community. He was thinking about the donut shop, closing in an hour, and the heavy, humid air that made his uniform shirt stick to his back. He'd been a cop in this mid-sized southern town for a long time. Long enough to see the patterns. Long enough to think he knew what the patterns meant. His name wasn't important to him right then. He was just tired, and the boredom of the shift was a physical weight. He watched the traffic on the main strip, his eyes glazing over until a flash of dark, polished metal caught his attention. A car. A nice one. A newer model luxury sedan. Black, so clean it looked like it rolled off the lot 5 minutes ago. It was being driven with careful, precise movements. He saw it change lanes, its signal blinking a solid 3 times before it merged. It was perfectly legal. But something about it irked him. Maybe it was the quiet confidence of the machine, so different from his own worn-out cruiser. Maybe it was the fact it was in a part of town where such cars weren't uncommon, but where he, in his experience, often found people trying a little too hard to look like they belonged. He didn't decide to pull it over. His hand just seemed to move on its own, flicking the lights. A short, electronic bleat of the siren. The black car glided obediently to the shoulder, its tires not even scraping the curb. He took his time. He finished typing the plate into the computer, watched the return come back clean, registered to an address in the nicest neighborhood in the county. He adjusted his mirror, sighed, and opened his door. The heat hit him like a wall. He walked up on the driver's side, his boots crunching on the gravel. The window slid down silently. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lavender. The driver was a woman. A black woman. She looked to be in her 40s, with a calm, composed face. She wasn't fumbling for her license. Her hands were resting on the leather-wrapped steering wheel at 10 and 2. She looked at him, not in the mirror. Her eyes were watchful, patient. "Afternoon," he said, his voice flat. "License and registration, please." "Good afternoon, officer," she said. Her voice was level, polite, but not warm. It was the voice of someone used to being in control of a room. She moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into the console and then her wallet, handing the documents over without a word. He took them back to his cruiser. The license checked out. No warrants. Perfect record. Her name was on the registration, too. Everything was in order. He sat there, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. The stop was over. He should write a warning for the lane change. A lane change that had probably been perfectly fine, and let her go. But he didn't. The calmness got to him. Most people got nervous. They chattered. They apologized. They got defensive. She just sat there, waiting. It felt like a challenge. In his mind, calmness like that, especially from someone driving a car like that, often meant they were hiding something. They thought the rules didn't apply. He'd seen it before. He walked back, handing her documents back through the window. "Step out of the car for me, ma'am." A slight pause. "May I ask why, officer?" "Just step out of the car, please." For a second, he thought she might refuse. But she didn't. She unfastened her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out onto the shoulder. She was taller than he expected, and she moved with a graceful kind of poise. She was dressed simply but expensively linen pants, a silk shell. And on her head, she wore a beautiful, vibrant silk scarf, tied artfully. It covered her hair completely. "Are you carrying any weapons, ma'am? Anything I should know about?" "No, officer, I am not. I'm going to perform a pat-down for my safety." "You understand?" She looked directly at him. "I do not consent to a search, officer. I have committed no violation that warrants one." His jaw tightened. I'm not asking for consent. This is for officer safety. Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the vehicle. A flicker of something, not fear, but a deep, cold anger passed behind her eyes. But she turned, slowly, and placed her palms flat on the hot roof of her car. He began to pat down, his movements rougher than they needed to be. He found nothing, of course. Just the fabric of her clothes, the keys in her pocket. As he finished, his eyes landed on her scarf again. It was bulky. You could hide things in a wrap like that. I need you to remove the head covering. She turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. No, it could be concealing a weapon or contraband. Remove it. That is not a lawful order, she said, her voice even quieter, tighter. My hair is underneath. It is not a threat to you. I am not removing my scarf. He felt his face grow hot. This was outright defiance. In front of him, on the side of the road, with people driving past. He couldn't back down now. His authority was the only thing he had in this exchange, and she was stripping it away with her quiet no. He didn't have a policy to quote. He just had a feeling, a burning need to regain control. Ma'am, you are obstructing my investigation. Now you can remove it, or I will secure it. She didn't move. She just kept looking at him, her gaze steady and unblinking. That look broke something in him. He reached for the multi-tool on his belt, flicking open the small, sharp blade meant for cutting seatbelts. He didn't think. He just acted. Have it your way, he muttered. He stepped close, grabbed a handful of the silk scarf and the hair he could feel bunched underneath it at her shoulder, and pulled. With a quick, rough sawing motion, he brought the blade across. There was a sound, a soft snick that was horrifyingly loud in the quiet air. A thick, beautiful braid, previously coiled under the scarf, fell away in his hand. He'd cut clean through it. The silk scarf, now loose, slipped partly from her head. The woman didn't scream. She jerked as if struck by electricity, her hands flying up to her head. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with a shock so profound it looked like physical pain. One hand clutched the remains of the braid at her scalp. The other touched the jagged, shoulder-length end where he had cut. Her breath came in a short, sharp gasp. Vadi dropped the severed braid on the ground between them. It lay there like a fallen animal. The tension was gone, replaced by a silence that was thick and sickening. He had won. He had proven his point. He swallowed, suddenly aware of what he had done, but burying the feeling under a mountain of justification. Asterisk, she made me do it. She was resisting. She was hiding something. Asterisk. All right then, he said, his voice strangely hoarse. You're free to go. Consider this a warning. He didn't wait for a response. He turned, walked back to his cruiser, his heart hammering in a way that felt less like triumph and more like panic. He didn't look back as he pulled away, leaving her standing there by her beautiful car, one hand still pressed to her head, staring at the dark braid lying in the dust dot in his rearview mirror. He saw her bend down, slowly, and pick it up. She held it for a moment, then got into her car. He drove faster, trying to outrun the image. He told himself it was just hair. It would grow back. She'd learn to show respect next time. He had no idea who she was. He didn't know that she was driving not home, but to the heart of the city, to the county law enforcement building. He didn't know she would park in a reserved spot, walk past the front desk with a familiar nod, and take the private elevator up to the top floor. He didn't know that the braid he had thrown to the ground was now resting on a polished oak desk, in front of the one man who had the power to unravel his entire world. All he knew, as he drove towards the donut shop, was that he had finally made someone listen. The hollow feeling in his stomach, he convinced himself, was just hunger. The world had shrunk to the size of her car. The soft hum of the air conditioning felt like a roar in the sudden, crushing silence. Her hands were on the steering wheel, but they didn't feel like her own. They were cold and tingling. The smooth leather under her palms was the only real thing. Her right hand lifted, slowly, as if pulled by a string. Her fingers touched the place where the braid had been. They traced the rough, uneven end, the strands feeling foreign and shocking against her skin. She pulled her hand back and looked at it, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing. Just her own trembling fingers. Then she looked down at the passenger seat. Dotted lay there, coiled like a sleeping snake against the cream-colored leather. Her braid, a part of her body, a part of her history, now just a thing, a discarded object. She stared at it, not with tears, but with a deep, cold numbness that was more frightening than any pain. She had spent hours on Sunday night having it done, the gentle hands of her stylist weaving and twisting, their laughter filling the salon. It was a ritual, a care, and he had cut through it in less than a second. A horn blared from the road. She jumped, her heart slamming against her ribs. She was still parked on the shoulder. Cars were streaming past, people on their way home from work, to the store, to their normal lives. She had to move. Her movements were mechanical. She fastened her seatbelt, checked the mirror, signaled, and pulled back onto the road. She drove the speed limit exactly, her eyes fixed ahead. But she wasn't seeing the road. She was seeing his face. The flat, bored look in his eyes that had turned to irritation, then to a kind of blank determination. She was feeling the tug on her scalp, the sudden, sickening release. She should go home. That's what her mind said. Go home, lock the door, and... What? Sit in the quiet? She knew if she went home, the numbness would crack, and what was underneath would be too vast, too terrible to face alone. Dot, without making a conscious decision, her hands turned the wheel. She wasn't heading towards her neighborhood. She was driving downtown, towards the cluster of government buildings made of old, heavy stone. The county law enforcement building was a block of gray concrete and glass. She pulled into the back lot, swiping a keycard at a gated entrance. The arm lifted. She parked in a spot marked Reserved SC. She sat for a full minute, the engine off, listening to the tick of the cooling metal. She reached over and picked up the braid from the passenger seat. It was heavier than she remembered. She held it in her lap for a moment, then carefully, almost reverently, placed it in her large handbag. She didn't look in the mirror. She couldn't bear to see herself yet. She got out, smoothed her linen pants, and walked towards the back entrance. Dot, the young deputy at the back desk, looked up from his computer. His face, which was usually ready with a friendly smile for her, froze. He saw her expression, the way she held herself too stiffly, the missing part of her that he sensed before he understood. "Ma'am," he said, starting to stand. "Is everything—" She walked past him. She didn't mean to be rude, but words were impossible. They were lumps of clay in her throat. She pushed through the heavy doors into the main hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A few people in uniform passed her. One, a lieutenant she knew well, opened his mouth to greet her, saw her face, and simply gave a slow, solemn nod instead. The gossip mill in this place was fast, but not this fast. This was something they saw in her eyes, in her walk. She took the private elevator in the back to the 3rd floor. The doors opened directly into a carpeted anteroom. The sheriff's executive assistant, a woman who had been there for 30 years, was at her desk. She looked up, her glasses on a chain. "Hello, sweetheart. He's just finishing up a—" The assistant's words died in her throat. Her eyes went from the woman's face to her scarf, which was now tied back hastily, the damage clearly visible. "Oh, my lord, what happened?" She just shook her head, a tiny movement. She walked past the desk to the large oak door with the frosted glass that read Sheriff. She didn't knock. She turned the handle and went inside. Her husband was behind his desk, his reading glasses on, frowning at her report. He was a big man, with broad shoulders that had started to stoop a little from decades of the weight of the job. He had a kind face, but it was a tired kind of kind, with lines carved by hard decisions. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption, ready to be the sheriff. Then he saw his wife. The sheriff vanished. In an instant, he was just her husband. His eyes widened. He took in everything, the shattered calm in her eyes, the defensive way her arms were wrapped around herself, the disarray of her scarf and hair. He was on his feet in a second, coming around the desk. "Hey?" he said, his voice soft, alarmed. "What is it? Are you hurt? What's wrong?" She didn't answer. She walked to his desk, the polished oak surface covered with neat stacks of paper and a framed photo of their family. She opened her handbag, reached inside, and pulled out the braid. She placed it carefully, almost gently, in the very center of his blotter. It lay there, dark against the green leather. A stark, surreal intrusion in the orderly room. He stared at it. For a few seconds, his brain refused to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a braid. Her braid. But it was detached. Here, on his desk. His eyes tracked from it, up her arm, to her shoulder, to the jagged end of hair resting there. His breath left his body in a quiet rush, as if he'd been punched. The color drained from his face. He understood. Not the details, but the essential, violent fact. Someone had cut her hair. Not with scissors in a salon. This was an act of force. An act of violation. Who? The word was a low crack of sound, like ice breaking underfoot. She finally found her voice. It was flat, empty. "One of yours." She recited the information like she was reading from a manual. "A traffic stop. On the county road by the mall. Lane change. He wanted to search me. I said no. He told me to take off my scarf. I said no. He had a knife on his belt. He just grabbed and cut it." She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry and burning. She was holding herself together by a single, fraying thread. Her husband reached out a hand, his fingers hovering over the braid, but he didn't touch it. It felt too sacred, too terrible to touch. His hand curled into a fist, his knuckles white. He looked from the hair on the desk to the face of his wife, the woman he loved, who carried herself with more dignity than anyone he knew, standing in his office with a piece of herself displayed like a war trophy. The rage that rose in him was a pure, white-hot thing. It was a husband's rage, primal and terrifying. He wanted to find the man right then and there. He wanted to break things. But then, almost as quickly, another feeling slammed into him. A colder, heavier weight. The sheriff's responsibility. This wasn't just an attack on his family. It was an attack on the oath he had sworn. It was a failure of his command. It was everything he had worked against, the abuse of power, the petty cruelty, the toxic pride that festered in some corners of the badge. The two roles, husband and sheriff, warred inside him, a violent storm. He closed his eyes for a second, forcing a breath into his lungs. When he opened them, the husband was still there, blazing in his gaze, but the sheriff was in control of his body. He walked around the desk and went to her. He didn't hug her. He knew right now she might shatter if he did. Instead, he put his hands on her shoulders, solid and warm. "Are you okay to tell me everything?" he asked, his voice gravelly but steady. "From the beginning. Every detail." She nodded, the numbness beginning to recede, replaced by a weary, detailed clarity. She told him. The model of the cruiser. The officer's face. The exact words spoken. The sound of the blade cutting through the hair. He listened, his face a stone mask. When she finished, he nodded. I need the citation he gave you. And I need you to write down your statement. Right now, while it's fresh. Can you do that? She nodded again. He guided her to a chair at the small conference table by the window, got her a legal pad and a pen, a glass of water. She started to write, her hand steadying as she focused on the facts. He returned to his desk. He looked at the braid one more time, a physical pain in his chest. Then he picked up his phone. His voice, when he spoke to his chief deputy, was quiet, utterly devoid of emotion, and all the more frightening for it. I need you in my office. Now. And bring me the personnel file and all available. Dash and body cam footage for officer. He looked at the citation. His wife had silently handed him Officer Briggs. Effective immediately, he is on administrative leave. No contact. No discussion. Just get him off the street and out of that uniform. Right now. The call came through just as he was pulling into the 7-Eleven parking lot, his mind already on a large coffee and a glazed donut. The voice of the watch commander was tight, all business. Return to the station immediately. Do not make any stops. Report directly to the chief deputy's office. Now. He sat for a second, the engine running. A twist of annoyance tightened in his gut. Probably some stupid paperwork mess-up, some bureaucratic hoop to jump through. He'd been planning to eat his donut in peace in the cruiser. He sighed, slammed the gear shift into drive, and swung back onto the road. The station felt different when he walked in. It wasn't busy. The shift change was still an hour away. But the few deputies and clerks in the open bullpen area didn't look at him. Or they looked, and then immediately looked away, focusing with sudden intensity on their computer screens or their coffee mugs. A strange quiet hung in the air, broken only by the static squawk of a distant radio. He walked down the hall to the chief deputy's office. The door was open. The chief deputy, a stern man with a shaved head who'd been a drill instructor, was standing behind his desk, not sitting. He didn't look up as the officer entered. Close the door. He did. He stood there, trying to read the room. You wanted to see me, sir? The chief deputy finally looked at him. His eyes were like chips of flint. Your sidearm. Your badge. Your duty belt. Place them on the desk. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They were just sounds. Then they clicked into place, and a cold wave washed over him, starting at the base of his skull and flooding down his back. What? Sir, what's this about? You are being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation. Your equipment. Now. An investigation? For what? His voice rose, edged with a defensive panic. His mind raced. What had he done? There was the thing with the car, but that was nothing. That was just a difficult driver. That couldn't be it. The investigation will determine that. You are not to contact any members of this department. You are not to discuss your leave with anyone. You are to go home and await further instruction from internal affairs. Do you understand these orders? But I have a right to know what the allegation is. He blustered, the fear turning to a hot anger. This was an insult. After all his years, the chief deputy's voice dropped, low and dangerous. The allegation is serious. Now, for the last time, your equipment, or I will have 2 deputies in here to relieve you of it. The humiliation was a physical burn on his face. Hands trembling slightly with rage, he unbuckled the heavy duty belt, the leather creaking. He laid it on the polished wood of the desk. The gun in its holster, the handcuffs, the can of pepper spray, the knife, the same knife he'd used not an hour before. It looked innocent there, just a piece of gear. He unpinned the silver badge from his chest. It felt cold and heavy in his palm. He set it down with a soft click. Without it, he felt naked. Just a man in a blue uniform shirt, suddenly powerless. "Go home," the chief deputy said, turning his back to look out the window. A clear dismissal. He walked out of the office. The walk down the hallway felt a mile long. Every door seemed closed. The silence was now roaring in his ears. He pushed out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling disoriented. He got into his personal truck, an old Ford, and just sat there. The anger swirled, looking for a target. It had to be a mistake. Someone had made a complaint. Some bleeding heart who didn't understand the job. It would blow over. They'd review the footage, see he was dealing with a non-compliant subject. And he'd be back on duty with an apology. He started the truck and drove home, the knot in his stomach tightening with every mile. Asterisk, 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 at that same moment. In the quiet, book-lined office 2 floors above, the sheriff was watching that footage. He sat alone in the dark, the only light coming from the large computer monitor on his desk. The video was split screen. The view from the dash cam and the jostling, personal view from the body camera on the officer's uniform. He watched his wife's car pull over. He watched his officer approach. He saw her calm face through the window. He listened to the flat, bored tone of the officer's voice. He saw him take her documents. The stop should have ended there. The sheriff leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, his fingers steepled under his chin. Then he saw it. The shift. The moment the officer came back and asked her to step out. There was no reason for it. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He heard her polite, firm refusal of consent for a search. He saw the officer's posture change, the irritation in the set of his shoulders. The pat-down was rough, unnecessary. The sheriff's wife stood still, her face a mask of controlled dignity. Then came the scarf. The sheriff's breath shallowed. He watched as the officer demanded its removal. He heard his wife's quiet, unwavering no. He saw the officer's face on the body cam feed, flushed with frustration. The man wasn't fearing for his safety. He wasn't conducting a lawful search. He was trying to win, to punish her for her calm, for her refusal to be intimidated. Then the hand went to the belt. The blade came out. The sheriff didn't blink. He forced himself to watch every millisecond. He saw the officer grab a handful of scarf and hair. He saw the quick, brutal sawing motion. On the dash cam, from a distance, he saw his wife flinch. He saw her hand fly to her head. He saw the officer drop something, the braid, onto the ground. The sheriff's own hand clenched into a fist on the desk. The audio picked up the officer's muttered, "All right then. You're free to go." The tone was one of disgusted dismissal. He watched the officer walk away, a swagger in his step, and drive off, leaving the woman he loved standing alone by the road. The video ended. The screen went black, reflecting the sheriff's own stony face back at him. For a long time, he didn't move. The husband in him was a raw, screaming thing. He wanted to find the man and show him what real power felt like. He wanted to break him, but the sheriff sat in the silence. He rewound the tape. He watched the key 30 seconds again. The demand, the refusal, the cutting. This time, he watched it not as a husband, but as a commander. He looked for procedural justification, for any thread of legality the officer could cling to. There was none. It was pure, petty abuse. A violent assertion of dominance for its own sake. This was the rot. This exact thing. Not the dramatic corruption of movies, but this small, ugly act of cruelty by a man who thought his badge was a crown. This was what destroyed trust. This was what turned a community against the people sworn to protect it. And it had happened to his wife. He picked up the framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of them from years ago on a hiking trip. They were both laughing, her hair then a big, beautiful afro caught in the sunlight. He traced the glass over her face with his thumb dot. Then he set the picture down carefully. He turned the monitor off. The room was dark. He knew what came next. The internal investigation would grind forward. The union would get involved. The officer would claim he felt threatened, that the hair could have concealed a weapon. They would argue. It would become a fight over policy, over semantics. But the sheriff had seen the truth. It was in the man's eyes on that video. It was in the casual way. He threw a piece of a person onto the dirt. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the town. His town, his responsibility. His wife was downstairs, writing her statement, holding herself together. The officer was at home, probably fuming, thinking this was just a bump in the road. The sheriff knew it was more than that. A line had been crossed, not just against his family, but against everything the badge was supposed to stand for. And now, he had to decide how to answer. Not as an angry husband, but as the sheriff. The weight of that decision settled on him, heavy and quiet in the darkening room. The easy thing would be revenge. The right thing, he knew, would be harder. Much, much harder. The week that followed was a strange kind of limbo. For the officer, the days bled together, long and empty and filled with a simmering, directionless anger. He stayed inside his house, the blinds mostly drawn. He jumped every time the phone rang, but it was never the department. It was only his union rep, a gruff man who told him to sit tight, that they were looking into it, that these things took time. The silence from the station was the worst part. It was a void where his life used to be. No radio chatter, no schedule, no purpose. He replayed the traffic stop in his head 1,000 times. She was resistant. She was hiding something in that scarf. He was sure of it. He was maintaining control of the situation. They'd see that. They had to. He started venturing out for groceries, feeling eyes on him in the small town. At the gas station, a guy he knew from the VFW gave him a long look, then turned away without a nod. The message was clear. He was toxic. He was in the bad place, and people were keeping their distance until they knew which way the wind was blowing. The anger curdled into something closer to fear. For the sheriff and his wife, the week was a quiet shared recovery. They didn't talk about it constantly. She saw a stylist who specialized in restorative cuts, who worked gently to even out the damage, creating a shorter, elegant style that made her look fierce and beautiful, though her eyes still held a new, careful shadow. The sheriff worked late but came home for dinner every night, something he hadn't done regularly in years. They were gentle with each other, the way people are after a storm has passed through, but left the air. Charged and changed, the official packet from Internal Affairs arrived at the officer's house by certified mail. It was thick. A formal notice of the investigation, a list of alleged policy violations, and a request for his written statement. Included was a single stark photograph, his own body cam still time-stamped, showing him with the blade in his hand, a handful of scarf and hair in his grip. Seeing it frozen like that, in black and white official paper, made his stomach turn. It looked different outside of his own memory. It looked aggressive. His union rep advised him to keep his statement simple. Stick to officer safety. Perception of a threat. You thought you saw a bulge. You acted to secure a potential weapon. Period. He tried to write it. He sat at his kitchen table, the pen feeling clumsy in his hand. Asterisk, I perceived a threat. The words looked hollow, stupid. He crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. He couldn't concentrate. A nervous energy jittered in his legs. He needed to do something, to explain himself, to make someone understand, That's when the idea came to him. It was a long shot, but the new community liaison officer had mentioned it once. A restorative justice pilot program. For low-level stuff, mostly kids. But maybe if he could talk to her. Explain his side. Make her see it wasn't personal. If she could forgive him, or at least understand, then the department would have to drop it. He was sure of it. He called his union rep, who sighed heavily but said he'd inquire. The answer came back faster than expected. The victim, they said, had been informed of the option, and she had agreed to a mediated meeting. A wild, hopeful relief flooded him. This was it. His way out. He just had to make her see. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The meeting was set in a neutral, bland conference room at the community center, not at the station. He arrived early, wearing a stiff, uncomfortable button-down shirt. He'd gotten a haircut. He wanted to look respectful, reasonable. The mediator was there, a calm older woman with glasses. Then the door opened, and she walked in. It was her, the woman from the car. She was dressed differently, a simple sweater and slacks, and her hair was now a short, soft curl. She looked older and tired, but her posture was straight. She didn't look at him. She sat down at the oval table, placing her hands neatly in front of her. The mediator went over the rules. This was a voluntary dialogue. The goal was understanding, not argument. Each would have a chance to speak without interruption. He couldn't wait. He leaned forward as soon as he got the signal. "I want to apologize," he began, the words rushing out. "I want you to know, that day I was just doing my job. It's a dangerous job. You have to understand, we never know what we're walking into. When you refuse the search, in my experience, that often means someone is hiding something. And that scarf, it was bulky. It could have concealed anything. I had a split-second decision to make for my safety." He was talking to her, but he was also talking to the invisible panel he imagined would review this transcript. He was building his case. "My intention was never to disrespect you as a person. It was about securing the scene. I hope you can see that. It was procedural." He finished, sitting back. He'd said his piece. He'd explained the pressure. She would nod now. She'd say she understood the difficult position he was in. She was silent for a long moment, looking at her hands. Then she lifted her head and looked directly at him for the first time. Her gaze was clear and unbearably steady. It didn't hold the anger he expected. It held something worse, a profound, weary understanding. "Officer," she said, and her voice was quiet but filled the room. "You keep talking about your safety. But I was not a threat. I was a woman in a car, coming home from the dentist. You have my record. It was spotless. You saw my address. You knew who I was before you ever asked me to step out of the car." He opened his mouth to protest, but she continued, her tone factual, not accusatory. "You asked me to remove my scarf. Do you know what my hair means to me? Not just to me, but to my mother, my grandmother, to generations of women in my family. It is not a hiding place. It is a part of me. When you demanded, I take it off in the dirt on the side of the road. You weren't looking for a weapon. You were asking me to strip away my dignity because you thought you could. And when I said no, you had to prove that you could." Her words were like stones, dropping one by one into still water, each one sinking deep. He felt his officer safety argument beginning to crumble under their weight. "I felt your hands when you patted me down," she went on, her voice tightening just a fraction. "It wasn't a search. It was a message. And the knife." She took a slow breath. "You didn't cut my hair to secure a scene. You cut it because I said no to you, and your pride couldn't allow it. You wanted to show me that my no meant nothing, that my body was not my own on the side of that road. You wanted to leave your mark. And you did. She didn't cry. She just stated it as a simple, terrible truth. The room was utterly silent. The mediator hadn't moved. The officer found he couldn't speak. The rehearsed lines about procedure and perception died in his throat. He was seeing the stop through her eyes for the first time, and the view was ugly. It wasn't about a hidden weapon. It was about power. His power. And he had used it in the smallest, meanest way possible. The mediator finally spoke. "Officer, do you have anything you'd like to say in response?" He tried to find the words. I didn't." He swallowed. "I didn't think of it like that." "Of course you didn't," the woman said, and there was no malice in it, just a crushing sadness. "You never had to." There was another long pause. Then the mediator looked at the woman. "Is there anything you need from the officer to move forward?" The woman shook her head slowly. "There is nothing he can give me. My hair will grow. My trust won't, not from him." She looked back at him, and her gaze was final. "I didn't come here for an apology. I came so you could see. Really see, for one moment, the person you thought was just a problem on your shift. I am a person, and you treated me like an object. Remember that." She stood up, gathered her purse, and walked out of the room, leaving the officer sitting there. Hollowed out, the mediator waited a moment, then said, "The meeting is concluded." She began gathering her papers. The officer sat, stunned. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, a chance to explain himself. And in doing so, he had finally understood the depth of what he had done. It wasn't a procedural error. It was a human failure. And as the truth settled over him, cold and heavy, he realized something with a jolt of despair. She had never said who she was married to. It hadn't mattered to her explanation at all. Her power in that room hadn't come from being the sheriff's wife. It had come from being right. The truth is a quiet thing. It doesn't always come with a bang. For the officer, it settled in the days after the meeting like a fine gray dust over everything in his life. He replayed her words in his head, over and over. Asterisk, you wanted to leave your mark. And you did. Asterisk, he could no longer hide behind the shield of procedure. He had seen himself through her eyes, and the reflection was shameful. He called his union rep. "I'm not going to fight it," he said, his voice dull. There was sputtering on the other end. Arguments about due process, about precedent, about not admitting guilt. He listened, then simply repeated, "I'm resigning." Make it happen. A few days later, a formal notice went out to the department. It was brief and dry. The officer had resigned, effective immediately, in lieu of termination. There was no dramatic press conference, no perp walk. Just a line in the internal daily bulletin, and then he was gone. The story, however, did not stay internal. A local reporter got a tip, maybe from a clerk, maybe from someone in the community who'd seen the stop. The reporter dug, confirmed the basics. An officer had cut a woman's hair during a traffic stop and had subsequently resigned. When the reporter pressed the sheriff's office for comment, the sheriff made a decision. He didn't hide behind no comment. He didn't sugarcoat it. He invited the reporter in, along with one camera from the local TV station. He sat behind his desk, looking directly into the lens, his face grave. His wife was not there. He would not use her that way. "Yes," he said, in answer to the first question. The incident occurred. It was a profound violation of policy, of ethics, and of basic human decency. The officer involved is no longer with this department. The reporter asked about the victim. "Is it true the victim was someone connected to this office?" "That she is. In fact, your wife?" The sheriff paused, choosing his words with care. "The victim is my wife. But that is not why this was wrong. It was wrong when it happened, before anyone in this office knew who she was. It would have been wrong if she were anyone. The fact that she is my wife brought the incident to my attention quickly, but it did not change the nature of the act. This was about an abuse of power, period. He announced concrete changes, not just promises. A new, clear policy, effective immediately, stating that hair, headwear, or hairstyles alone could never constitute probable cause for a search, and that altering or cutting a person's hair during a detention was explicitly banned unless in a direct, life-threatening emergency. He announced mandatory training for every deputy on cultural competency and de-escalation to start within the month. He called it the Dignity Protocol. The story ran on the evening news. It was a sensation, but not the kind the sheriff feared. The community response was not, for the most part, anti-police. It was anti-bullying. People were shocked by the casual cruelty of it. Letters to the editor praised the sheriff's direct handling. Community leaders, especially from the black community, cautiously acknowledged it as a step, a rare instance of accountability. But the sheriff knew policies and news cycles weren't enough. One evening, he found his wife in her study, looking over legal papers. She had filed a civil lawsuit against the former officer and the county. He leaned in the doorway. The money. He started. He didn't want anyone thinking she was cashing in. She looked up. It's not for money. It's for a settlement. All of it, every penny, will go to fund a new community program. A Saturday academy for young black girls. Mentorship, self-defense workshops, lessons on their legal rights, on hair care and history. It will be called the Our Crown Program. She met his eyes. He took a piece of my crown. I'm using it to build stronger ones. He nodded, a swell of pride aching in his chest. She was turning the pain into something solid and good. Asterisk, 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 weeks passed. The former officer tried to become invisible. He got a job doing overnight security at a warehouse out of town, where no one knew his face. The uniform was different. The authority was empty. He was just a guy with a flashlight. One afternoon, he was at the county administrative building, waiting in a long line to get a new driver's license. The place was crowded, hot, everyone tired and annoyed. He kept his head down, reading a faded poster about fishing licenses. Then he saw her. She was walking down the corridor with two other women, all of them dressed in sharp business suits. They were laughing about something, a warm, genuine sound. She looked different. Not just the hair, which was now a short, chic silver-flecked curl. She looked lighter, in command. She was pointing something out to her colleagues, her gesture confident. She hadn't seen him. He shrank back, hoping a pillar would swallow him. His heart hammered. He was suddenly back on the side of the road, holding the knife, feeling that surge of petty power. He watched as a young deputy, a fresh-faced kid he didn't recognize, hurried up to the group. The deputy was holding a clipboard, looking flustered. He seemed to be asking for directions to an office. The woman he had stopped listened, then smiled. She took the clipboard, pointed to a line, said something that made the young deputy nod in relief. She handed it back with a kind word. The deputy thanked her, his demeanor one of clear respect, and hurried off. The former officer stared. The deputy hadn't saluted her, because she was the sheriff's wife. He hadn't been nervous around her. He had approached her because she looked like someone who knew what she was doing. Someone in charge. Someone worthy of a basic human kindness. The contrast was a physical blow. He had seen her as a problem to be solved, a defiance to be crushed. The world, this young deputy, her colleagues, the entire town now saw her as a leader. He had tried to diminish her, and he had only diminished himself. Utterly and completely. She and her group turned a corner and were gone. The line inched forward. The man felt the weight of his own life, the smallness of it. The anger was gone. All that was left was the regret, heavy and solid as a stone in his gut. He would carry it forever, not because he got caught, but because he finally understood what he had done. Asterisk, 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 later that night. The sheriff came home late. He found his wife on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl, looking at the stars. He brought out 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her. Long day? She asked. Long week, he sighed. The first dignity protocol training is tomorrow. I'm leading it. Good, she said softly. They sat in a comfortable silence. It wasn't the same silence as before. The old silence had been about the weight of his job, the distance it created. This silence was shared. It held the recent pain, but it also held the shape of the new program, the new policy, the hard work ahead. I saw the final designs for the Our Crown logo today, she said after a while. It's beautiful. A young girl's profile with a crown made of woven hair and oak leaves. For strength. He reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cool. He laced his with them. We can't fix it all, he said, not looking at her, looking at their joined hands. One policy, one program. It's just a start. I know, she said, but it's a start we didn't have before. A start that came because one woman said no on the side of a road, and because a sheriff, who loved her, decided to listen. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. There were no more words needed. The fight wasn't over. There would be resistance to the training, grumbling in the ranks, people who would always think the old way was better. But a line had been drawn. A marker had been placed. The story wouldn't be about a cop who messed with the wrong person. In the end, it became a story about a town that was forced to look at something ugly, and chose, however imperfectly, to try and be better. It started with a single cruel cut, and it ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, determined work of building something new from the broken pieces.